All right, and welcome back to the Between Two Rocks podcast / YouTube channel, question mark. Yeah, so this is the first ever video of the Between Two Rocks podcast, which you may or may not be watching. I don't know. Maybe you're just on Spotify. I haven't figured it out yet. We don't know what's going to happen, but we're recording this via Zoom, and then presumably we're going to take the audio and get that around on Spotify and Stitcher and all that jazz, but I don't know what's going to happen. You may never hear this.
Mm-hmm.
So,
it may not be recording at all. We'll find out.
Yeah, exactly. This could end up being a colossal waste of time. So, but yeah, I'm your host, Josh Levinson. I'm here once again with Colin Ryan.
Hey, how's it going, Josh? Good to be here again. This feels a lot more like work than the normal podcast.
Does it?
Yeah, just being on a Zoom call. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, I mean, but I didn't have to put pants on, so I feel like it's kind of a wash.
Yeah, that's true.
So, I don't know. I feel neutral.
Yeah, you don't have to put pants on at Babtree. They'd be fine with that.
That's true, but I just feel like anytime I leave, I don't know. It depends. When I go to Walgreens, like, that's one thing I like living about, like, in, you know, not the nicest neighborhood, is that if I go to, like, the Walgreens in pajamas, nobody's judging me.
Yeah, I think that's a Walgreens thing in general. Most Walgreens pants are optional.
Yeah, fair. Cool. So, yeah, we haven't recorded one in, I don't even know, a while. It's been a while. So, yeah. How you doing, Colin?
Doing pretty good, man.
Nice. How's your son?
He's doing great. He's growing bigger by the day. Oh yeah.
Nice. Does he talk?
He verbalizes. Yeah.
Okay.
He's got a range of words. It's funny, if I brought him on the Zoom right now, he just would be totally nonverbal, and you would think that he didn't talk at all. But yeah, he talks when he's comfortable.
That's how I am sometimes at parties, you know.
Exactly.
Like, is that adult nonverbal?
Yeah. Henry's got two close friends, and he's uncomfortable otherwise.
Yeah, it's fair. And this is exactly a good time to learn to socialize. So
yeah,
cool. So our guest this week, as you can probably see if you're on YouTube or wherever we've released this, is Richard Volkman, who is the chairperson of philosophy over at Southern Connecticut State University. Mm-hmm. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks for having me.
You like Richard? Do you go by Richard?
Richard is good. Perfect.
All right, great. Not Rich. Great. Love it. Double syllable.
Rick, but yeah.
Or Rick. Okay. Yeah, I feel like I don't know you like that, you know. Let's maybe by the end.
Yeah. Philosopher Rick. I mean.
Philosopher Rick.
Now with more, maybe I'll go back to Rick, right? Because
that's even more syllables. Richard is good.
Richard does sound more scholarly. That was in grad school. I became Richard.
Okay, nice. So this is a new position for you as the chairperson of philosophy over there.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
New as of when?
New as of this fall. So it's been about the worst possible time to take over this new, I don't know, maybe it's been the best possible time. I don't have much to compare it to, but the pandemic has been a real challenge on a whole bunch of different dimensions. I was talking to Colin before we got started here a little bit about.
And it was exciting, and you guys all missed it, just so you know. Like, the best part of the podcast we did not record.
No, pure gold at the beginning.
Well, but the challenges in the classroom are one thing, and everybody's facing that. The challenge from the point of view of the chair involves a whole bunch of other dimensions, not the least of which is enrollments are way off, and we they bounce back in the fall. You know, I can't blame a lot of students who figured,
or maybe delaying their education for a little bit.
Yeah, let's give a miss to this year and come back when we can do it right, because we can do a lot online, and students who are really well motivated can still get a decent education. But
that was not me, I'll tell you that.
No.
Yeah. It takes a lot more self-starting.
Did they give you that chair when you became the chair?
This chair? No. Yeah. This is my old chair.
It's your old chair. They didn't even give you a chair to become chair?
Well, there is one.
Or there is a chair at the school?
Go on campus. So,
Right. Do you ever just go in there and just sit on the chair and spin and spin?
I don't. But I do go in.
But now that I put the thought in your head.
Now maybe I will. Maybe I will now. Although I don't know
if you could send a video of you doing that, it would help me a lot.
Yeah, well, now you got me thinking, so maybe we'll figure that out.
That's what I'm here for, ideas. So congratulations. Did you have to kill the last chairperson? Is that how that works?
Thank goodness they abolished the,
Highlander rule.
And it was just a simple vote amongst the department, mostly precipitated by the previous chair's earnest desire to get out of the chair.
Okay, I got you.
It's a lot of work. It
wasn't like a fraught political. You weren't like, this isn't like a House of Cards where you're like secretly working against people.
Except insofar as people are secretly working to try not to be chair, right?
Right. Yeah. No, you. I think you'd be a great leader. No, please.
There you got it. Exactly.
Nice. And so the chair is like responsible for, kind of deciding the curriculum and enrollment, or how does it all?
No, in theory, I suppose, and in some programs maybe, but in philosophy, it is extremely important that we sustain the utmost respect for academic freedom, because philosophers don't agree about stuff. And if someone's trying to impose their vision, there's going to be fights. It's going to get ugly. It's going to be terrible. And so, much to the contrary, the chair's job, I think, is to try to make it the case that those conflicting views don't wind up in open conflict, right? And try to give people the room wherein they get to choose for themselves, what their curriculum is going to be. So there's a structure, there's a framework to it, a certain kind of, there's something that it is to teach ancient philosophy. And if you're bringing in, Rihanna videos, you better have an explanation of how that relates to Plato and Aristotle or something. But I
think it's self-explanatory. I don't understand why people need anything else.
Maybe my job is to make sure that you do that explaining, right? And if you do that, then I'm perfectly cool with it. And I think that's the usual attitude that we try to take.
I feel like you're giving me a hard time about my philosophy of Rihanna class, and I don't know why.
Hey, I would support your offering a philosophy of Rihanna class. Just make sure that what you bill it as is that and not ancient philosophy, right?
Gotcha. Yeah. She is not that ancient.
No.
Great.
So how many philosophers are there at Southern that are under you, that you lord over?
Right now we have about 9 full-time faculty. And then if you include the adjuncts, we had about another half dozen to, depending on the semester and the enrollments, half dozen to more. But we've just been slashed, right, with the enrollment declines due to the pandemic. And so we're down to just 2 adjuncts right now.
Are you considering all of the undergrads who are stoned and just watch The Matrix?
Yes, that's our target audience. No, those are exactly the people that I want to reach, right? Those people,
they're ready.
They're already thinking philosophically, maybe in a little more of a confused way than we'd like, but we can remedy that. It's much harder to get the people who don't ever have any philosophical thoughts to sort of entertain what we're trying to get at than it is folks who are doing bad philosophy, right?
Yeah. What major do you think is the most opposite of philosophy?
Bad philosophy either. Sorry, go ahead.
What major do you think is like the exact opposite, that you'd have the hardest time getting somebody to think philosophically?
It was a really revealing moment to me, and I learned so much from this encounter I had with a student in accounting. So I would say maybe.
That's a good one.
Who was insanely good at philosophy. I was just floored by how serious and careful and detailed his thinking was. And I told him, you are so good at this. I understand accounting, they'll pay you big bucks and there's not a lot of, money to be made in philosophy or whatever, but you could add it as a minor. You could add it as a second major. You're so good at it, right? Why wouldn't you want to do this? And he just looked at me, very flat expression on his face. He says, no, I love accounting. I'm like, how could you love accounting? I mean, to me, that would be the opposite, as I said.
He's a sociopath. Yeah. Probably should have reported him to somebody.
Yeah, here's what he said. He said, well, actually, I'm diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, functional obsessive compulsive disorder. And when the numbers line up on that spreadsheet, it gives me a thrill.
Wow. That is something.
It blew my mind, and it reinforced, the thing that I'm really interested in philosophically is what I call ethical individualism, which relies on this fact that each of us is a unique individual and that we do our best by becoming who we are, to borrow a phrase from Nietzsche, who borrowed it from Pindar, which is ironic because they're all advocating individualism. But anyway, it reminded me, we are deeply different in our fundamental constitutions, and we need to find a way to enjoy our excellences, our virtues, in complementary ways, right? And to appreciate that what you love and the nature of the true, the beautiful, and the good that's appropriate to a creature like you is not necessarily the same as for anybody else. So I had to admit, a person who really loves it when everything lines up would not be happy.
So do you think that person do you think they were predestined to be an accountant?
Well, yeah. At the end of the day, I mean, I wouldn't use the language of predestination because that's associated with Calvinism and it's got a whole bunch of religious overtones. But at the end of the day, I am a believer in determinism, causal determinism. The universe is unfolding according to regularities. There are limits to that, we know from quantum physics. But even there, if we understand the philosophy of time, it sure looks like we have to think of every moment as existing as what it is. This kind of falls out of Einstein's general relativity, that we shouldn't be thinking of the past as gone, and we shouldn't be thinking of the future as non-existent, but we should be thinking of the universe as unfolding from our perspectives inside of it, but from the outside, we would think of it as a four-dimensional space-time entity, right? Where over there is exactly analogous to back then or in the future. That is to say, location in time is like location in space. And everybody understands that when I'm sitting here in my home office, my office on campus still exists. Well, likewise, when I'm sitting here right now talking to you, 2 days ago when I was doing something else, that still exists in its own moment. This is a doctrine known as eternalism. And I don't think it is like deductively proven or it's necessary given Einstein's physics, but it is a very natural step to take after Einstein's physics. And that means, yes, I do believe that, this person was sort of a born accountant. And
does that mean that we don't have free will?
It means that the free will that we have is going to be compatible with determinism. Yeah. So now critics.
So I think I'm making a decision, but in fact, I was predetermined to eat waffles and not eggs this morning.
How about this? You were predetermined to choose to eat waffles.
Yeah. Based on my value system and my availability of waffles and.
Yes.
Do you think Josh is incapable of being anything except a small town blog host?
I couldn't speculate on that with any.
We'll ask you again.
You'd be right.
We'll ask you 40 minutes, and then you can weigh in. I would make the argument that not only does the past and future not exist, but now it doesn't really exist either. That this is all just sort of an illusion of our minds.
Well, there's a long tradition in various philosophies that speak to that, and that's part of the existential crisis actually that I had that caused me to rethink some of the stuff that I've been working on for a long time. I'm
a big, when I went to CCSU for a year and I had this English professor, and first of all, she was like, you got to leave this school. These kids you're like these dummies. You got to get out of here and go to UConn or something. And I was like, okay, thanks. First of all, you're really denigrating the state university. Anyway,
yeah.
But she's like, you got to get into Albert Camus. And I didn't know anything about existentialism, but it was like a pretty blowing thing when I started reading Camus and Kierkegaard and Sartre. And I was like, yeah, this is exactly what I think.
Yeah.
And I don't need to explore any further because I think I found what I like,
Yeah, wonderful. And, that is although you do still need to explore further.
Nope.
Nope. That first chapter was it. He's done.
I do not want to be further challenged.
It's never done, right? I mean, once the bug bites you, once the philosophy bug bites you.
I'm 40. It's actually done. Yeah. 30s, sure.
It's lurking in the back of your mind. You wait. It'll come back. It's still there. It will come back, and you'll need to dig into it some more. But, I got to say, at Southern, I think, we can cultivate a community which is very into that. In fact, we have a weekly philosophy club where it's just a free form. It's much like this conversation, and whatever comes up, and Camus and Sartre and Kierkegaard in particular all figure rather prominently in those conversations. And so there are people at Southern who can and will do those kinds of have those kinds of conversations.
Yeah, I think my teacher was wrong. I remember especially in like Western Civ, I had some kids in my classes at CCSU who were super smart, and actually the best computer science professor I ever had was at Central. So I don't know, she was just The
thing is, I myself went to a university that is analogous exactly to what the place that Southern has in the
hierarchy of universities.
A former normal school, right? That is to say, it started as a teacher's college and became a university over time. This was in Winona, Minnesota. and it was much the same. There are people who are as smart as absolutely anybody anywhere at all of these schools, because there's lots of reasons that you wouldn't want to or couldn't go to one of these flagship universities.
Yeah, money, time, yeah, just any number of issues, yeah.
Yeah, it should be granted there are lots of people there who are not like that, right? I mean...
Yeah, no, I think, this English class, there were some dummies, but nonetheless.
Yeah, well, there are lots of people there who maybe don't belong in any college at all, but how do you know until you've tried it, right? And
true.
There's a fact.
How will you know unless you spend $50,000 is the only way to be sure.
That's right.
That's why you should go to Southern, right? All your listeners...
100%, yeah.
You should go to Southern because it won't...
Go to an in-state university.
It's only $28,000. It's great.
I promise there is nothing that you will ask where I'll say, I'm sorry. I could only answer that question for another $20,000.
That's how philosophy should work, actually. You should be doling it out for 10 grand at a time.
I do. But anywhere except in the classroom, people get angry with you if you do that.
I was about to make an extremely dirty joke, and then I was like, you know what? Maybe we'll just pump the brakes.
Now in the listener's imagination what that joke might have been.
Absolutely. They know me well enough to get there. They'll be fine. So heroic individualism.
Mm-hmm.
That is what your website says.
Mm-hmm.
And this is sort of but you use a different term. What individualism?
Ethical individualism.
Ethical individualism.
Yeah, so that's the more generic term that I would use to refer to.
So we're all individual. Even people who drink pumpkin spice lattes, those people are individuals as well?
Yeah, you're an individual even if you're following the herd, right?
Yeah.
Although you're kind of denying your own individuality in that case. And if you're just doing it because everybody else is doing it, not because you like it, that would be troubling. But yeah, some folks are built to love the pumpkin spice latte. I think this is all grounded. At the end of the day, I'm committed to at least keeping everything consistent with a thoroughgoing philosophical naturalism. That means everything has to fit with what we know from the sciences, right? That doesn't exhaust everything that there is to say, but everything has to fit with that. And so I think if we want to understand pumpkin spice latte, we probably want to understand the human palate and the cultural circumstances that lead folks to thinking about all of this. And all of those conspire to create all of these different individuals. And there's going to be patterns that emerge. People will be similar in lots of ways. And
wow, I really regret making this joke. Yeah, well done.
Let's dig deeper.
Oh no, what have I done?
Point a philosopher in a direction and they just kind of keep going.
Yeah, no, I see. Gonna have to be a little more careful about what direction I point it.
Yeah. If you didn't want the philosophy of pumpkin spice latte, you shouldn't.
That was my bad. That was my mistake, and I have learned. I actually had a question. This was going back to. I do want to discuss heroic individualism, but I discussed the Matrix really earlier, and I was actually just kind of curious before I forget. Is like what's a sort of popular movie that you think introduces philosophical thought in like a mainstream way, or
you already
philosophy friendly? Right.
I think the Matrix really is.
You think that's the quintessential?
Well, I show it or assign it in my philosophy.
Just because it challenges the fundamental nature that we live in.
It goes beyond that. It actually makes very self-conscious and very explicit references to all sorts of philosophy throughout. I mean, the basic premise, the basic premise illuminates the very key issue that Descartes brings up that sets up the I think, therefore I am. Descartes is worried about exactly this thing. How do I know that external world exists at all? How do I know what the thing is? And he keeps asking, do I know this? Do I know that? Until he gets back to, do I know that I exist? And then he realizes, well, if I don't exist, then how am I asking this question?
Right.
So he says, okay, I think, therefore I am. And then he tries to rebuild the whole world in light of that. And so the Matrix works really well in that. But it's also drawing this fundamental distinction, which is the same distinction that really, in a way, starts what we think of as Western philosophy, at least in its fullest form. There are other philosophers before Plato, but in Plato, we finally get this bringing together of what we back then was called natural philosophy, what today we call science, along with these questions about the ultimate nature of reality, metaphysics, and also ethics, right? And between those and questions about knowledge. And so in Plato, we finally get the whole deal. But one of the things that Plato introduces is exactly this fundamental distinction between appearance and reality.
Right, and the form of an object versus the object itself.
So So yeah, I think that really is. I mean, there's lots of other movies, and there's almost no movie out there that lacks philosophical content, even sometimes despite itself. There's if we think of philosophy as what we do,
even white chicks.
I haven't seen that.
That's what the Wayans brothers pretending to be white women. It's pretty philosophically challenging.
Here's a philosophical puzzle that would emerge from that.
It does challenge your belief about all the ideas you held about the world, though.
If you believed in God before, this is going to challenge that.
Yeah. Well, and it's taking a stand about issues that I think today it's a very, very uncomfortable to take a stand about.
Well, White Chicks was not taking any stand.
Well,
except mocking white chicks. Yeah.
Version of the blackface archetype, which is now an absolute no-no.
Yeah.
And that raises, in my mind, I haven't seen the movie, right? But that raises in my mind.
I also have not seen the movie.
I haven't seen it either, but I'm sure it's exactly what we're all picturing.
Yeah, I doubt it challenges your expectations.
It's probably not designed to do that quite in that way.
All right, so heroic individualism. I guess is basically just it's about this idea of like being like who you are, like we're all our own people, and sort of finding that and celebrating that. Is like, I mean, how would you give me a 2-sentence?
Is this first of all, is this your own philosophy that you've come up with? I know it's the name of your website, so I'm hoping it's yours.
So the way
is this your brand?
It sort of is. I mean, the way these things unfold is, many scholars become interested in this or that thinker, and they become scholars of that thinker. I'm not interested, and this is an expression of heroic individualism now, I think. I'm not that interested in writing books about books. And I'm borrowing that, ironically, somewhat from Emerson, who's one of my favorite thinkers. I'm not sure if I'd call him a philosopher, but he's definitely a thinker of some kind. And Emerson was this incredibly important influence on Nietzsche, who was another, definitely a philosopher, although again, not quite like other philosophers, much nearer to a literary figure. But I don't consider myself an Emerson scholar. I'm not a Nietzsche scholar. I'm not poring over them to try to figure out what they really meant or anything like that. I'm inspired by them. And those are the two main figures of what I call heroic individualism, the antecedent figures. I think that's where it kind of really comes into its own. We could find others, Montaigne, they're both inspired by Montaigne. And I think I would usually include John Stuart Mill, even though his theoretical side is not very heroic individuals. He's a utilitarian. But nonetheless, especially in his book on liberty, I think he really expresses the key ideas of heroic individualism, especially as they start to make their way into social and political philosophy. So those would be the three main characters that would be the inspirations for it. But at the end of the day, it's what I'm doing, and I get all the blame for all the stupidities in it, right? And I'm sure there are plenty of stupidities in it, because there is in everything. I've never had an idea that I thought would withstand scrutiny once and for all forever, right? It's a flux, it's a fluid. This is why, as Emerson says, a foolish consistency is a hobgoblin of small minds and philosophers and divines, right? It's these.
So now that you've told us your philosophy is wrong, could you describe it?
Yeah. And it's fluid, that, and I'm not.
I appreciate the disclaimer. I also like to open up my comedy sets by saying this is probably not going to be great, but
the more I do, the more deep I dig into this stuff, and this is why the website has been updated for
6 years,
because I hit a wall where I'm stuck with a puzzle relating to the relationship between religion and what we might call ultimate morality or transcendent morality, and the relationship of that to heroic individualism. I think I have worked out, but I'm still working out this other part, which has become really pressing in my mind. So I haven't updated it because I'm going to need to change some things for sure. So I really am quite sure that there's some stuff that's wrong.
Yeah.
But the main idea, as you said, like Emerson, and I think also like Nietzsche, the main idea is to try to encourage people to feel empowered to become who they are. That's a phrase that Nietzsche cites from Pindar, but it captures this idea both of the fluidity, because it emphasizes becoming rather than being, but at the same time, it acknowledges this fact that the universe kind of is what it is, right? And its becoming is a function of our location in space and time in discrete moments, right? So it feels like it flows, even though it is what it is. And one of the causes that leads it to become what it becomes rather than some other thing is precisely going to be your reflections on it and your thinking about it. And so the heroic individualist wants to encourage you to be, to use Emerson's key notion, self-reliant, right? And I take that to mean simply a kind of honesty, right? And so, and when people hear that, they get nervous sometimes because they imagine that what Emerson is saying is that you should be like some oracle. In Emerson's view, he's kind of a Platonist. He thinks that the individual has a direct insight to the ultimate nature of reality through intuition that that person should give voice to. And I think I'm in substantial agreement with that, although I'd make a whole bunch of tweaks and changes to make it fit what we know now about brain science and a bunch of other things. But the idea that you can just see things that others are not situated to see, and therefore you have at least a license, and I would argue probably even further that it's a duty to try to articulate that perspective. That's your mission in life. That's what you're here for. If you depart from that, you might as well not exist at all, because that's the unique thing that you can bring for the rest of us to think about. But it's going to be inevitably a particular perspective that is by its nature not going to necessarily be applicable to everybody, and it's going to be limited in a way that makes it by its nature wrong. In just the way I was talking about before, there's going to be stuff that is not accessible to you, and this is why it's so important to get involved in a conversation with others. And it's in that conversation that hopefully the full picture, the full notion of the nature of the universe and the answer to the life and the meaning of everything is to emerge. If it's going to emerge at all, it's going to be in that conversation where we have each individual articulating their ability to see one corner of it. You might know that old Hindu or Indian story of the three blind men and the elephant, right? Where they've each got a hold of a different part of the elephant, and they ask them, "What do you have in front of you?" And one of them has the trunk and thinks it's like a snake, and the other has a hold of the side of the thing and thinks it's like a I don't know, like a big building or something. That's how we are.
Does one have the butt?
One, well, that's a great way to extend the metaphor. I don't recall ever seeing it in the traditional tellings of that fable, but there would be room to do that. I'm not sure what that would be like. What would that be like?
It feels like a soft hole.
We're describing it now.
I don't know, there's probably a polite way to describe how that person experienced the elephant. But
do you think the
differently, right?
Do you think the idea of the everyone having their own perspective, and that's important to develop your own perspective, do you think that gives rise to kind of how we're living in this era of multiple truths, and it's hard to we're having the hardest time just deciding that things are objectively true, and you don't necessarily want to empower everyone to think that their unique perspective is somehow correct when it's we can objectively say that it's wrong.
Yeah, except, well, so you put your finger on exactly the important puzzle that's going on here, especially at this cultural moment. And
wait, are you guys trying to say this QAnon stuff isn't real? Because
and there's lots of crazies in every corner of the world. And in the initial days, now my other main philosophical interest is precisely in computer ethics and about the cultural impact of the information age and the computer revolution. And in the early days of that, I was among those who were very, very optimistic about our future, because as I saw it, the computer revolution represents an upgrade to our basic information processing systems as a society. And by that, I mean this conversation that I was just talking about across all these individuals. And the expectation was that once you do that, you've got this much more diverse and expansive marketplace of ideas. The best ideas in the marketplace of ideas should prevail because they have the best arguments for them. And therefore, you've created a circumstance where you can really do a much better job of getting a handle on what you're calling objective reality. I don't want to wade in too much about what I think about that, because I'm not.
Not a real thing.
Metaphysics comes up. I mostly want to say metaphysics, bah, and that way I can avoid even expressing a proposition. or at least that was my former view.
I think I used to have a pretty similar view in terms of like the internet. I was like, oh, it'll be egalitarian. Everyone will have a chance to express their thoughts. And now I'm like, boy, a lot of these people should not be expressing their thoughts. This is
and I want to caution against what you just said, because here's what I think has emerged and what we didn't anticipate in those early days, which is that there's this deep latent tribal tendency in humans. This is an evolved tendency that presumably must have served our ancestors at some point. It's about coalition building. It's about defining an in-group, which necessitates defining an out-group. And as Jonathan Haidt, the celebrated social psychologist, likes to say, morality binds and blinds, right? It makes it the case that your community comes together, but it also makes it the case that you can't see how other people seeing things very, very differently could possibly be right. And what that resulted in, especially once we brought in some of these what I regard as really tragic developments in the unfolding of the internet, namely social media as it exists today, especially Twitter, which is the worst. I mean,
Twitter, you think is the worst?
Absolutely. It starts with 140. It's no longer, they made revisions, so things are different. But when it comes in, it's 140 characters. You cannot have a meaningful, deep, sensitive conversation in 140 character snippets.
You can say something pretty clever.
Well, yeah, all you can do is a shallow, clever snark.
Yeah, get a hearty ha.
Josh World.
Right? And so that means that what you're doing is you're building up these tribes. And I don't see any way for Twitter to not be doing that, but the other platforms are doing it as well. And it leverages this natural tendency in humans to have this coalitional tribalism, and it creates all this divisiveness, all this conflict, all this animosity, which we would be much, much better off without.
Do you think the internet is a net negative or net positive for society? Exclude Wikipedia.
Yeah.
You can't exclude Wikipedia. One of the best things about it.
Well, and Wikipedia actually,
except for sex, how do you think marriage is? Like, I don't know.
The Wikipedia is maybe the best example of the original promise of the internet working as we had hoped it would, right? Because in its original incarnation, again, these things have changed since their original versions, but in the original incarnation, everybody could contribute whatever they wanted. And the people who think that we need to have a central notion of everything and experts in charge and stuff like that, we're all complaining that can't possibly work, and it worked masterfully. And studies comparing it to edited encyclopedias show that it was about as accurate, but much more huge and covered a lot more topics. So Wikipedia is evidence that this, what's in the literature sometimes called the wisdom of crowds, can work, right? That really, when we do have this conversation together, we do track reality really remarkably well. In the case of Wikipedia, even though the only sanction was getting your comment, replaced by somebody else's comment, and that would sometimes lead to these editing wars. But eventually, the view that would prevail in almost all of the topics was the truth, because the people who are most attached to their views tend to correlate with the people whose views are true. And so the early Wikipedia was a great example of how we were hoping it was all going to work. The later Wikipedia now has a lot more of these moderating and tribal elements to it, and is becoming, frankly, less reliable.
So even if you include Wikipedia, do you think at this point in time we'd be better off if the internet had never come to be?
No, I don't. Although I'm tempted that way, and we'll see how it turns out.
How would this podcast even exist, Colin?
That's what I'm getting at.
So much good stuff that we can do that I can't imagine just striking it all. If things really become dystopian, and they very well could, and I'm very, very concerned right now that they will. But if things become truly, truly dystopian, then I may have to reconsider. And I wouldn't have even been able to dream of that 20 years ago.
See, for me, I think one of the problems of the internet is essentially that, like, we as humans are sort of like, we have like an evolutionary desire to sort of believe things that seem like they come from authority. And now with the advent of like, video editing for all, like anybody can basically come up with a YouTube video that looks semi-professional and be like, see, 9/11 was an inside job. And they quote one bad structural engineer who's like, yeah, that could be possible. And now it's like, all right, wow, see, now I'm asking questions. And like, because people look at it and they're like, well, this looks pretty professional, and I'm just weighing both sides, but it's like both sides are not really as well educated on the topic. Like one side has many thousands of structural engineers who are like, no, it looks like a plane flew into it and it collapsed. Like that's the, I don't want to say the objective truth, but the likely truth based on the information we have, you know what I mean? Versus like this one guy who, dropped out of school and just happens to know how to edit videos, but he can make himself sound pretty smart. And we as humans don't all have the ability to sort of like critically look at that information and be like, is this right? Like how does that make sense?
Part of that story you're describing has to change, right? It's not the part about the person being able to make this view, because we need to hear that view. The only reason
that's what I'm saying. And I wonder, do we need to hear every view?
Let me say why. The only reason we have as much confidence as we do have that this was not an inside job is that people have tried to make that case, and that case has been found wanting. I cannot prove to you that a hypothesis is true. This is a logical problem. A statement of the form, if P, then Q.
Oh God, I hated discrete math
so much. 9/11 was an inside job.
I'm convinced. I think that maybe it was. Yeah.
You heard the P and Q part, right?
You can't prove that P by observing that Q. If P, then Q. I observe that Q, therefore P. That's an invalid argument. Mm-hmm. If P is your hypothesis, right? If 9/11 was a inside job, then we would observe whatever. We observe whatever. It doesn't follow that it was an inside job, right?
Right.
You can't. So this generalizes. I'm just leveraging some stuff, especially out of Karl Popper, but it's pretty standard stuff in philosophy of science now. What you can do is you can show that a hypothesis is wrong. And so you don't want to suppress all the wrong hypotheses. You want them all out there, because what gives us confidence that the true hypothesis is true is that we've looked through all of the other ones and they all fail to match up to the observations.
But isn't that the exact problem that's going on? That a lot of these, QAnon things and other stuff that percolates on the internet, you specifically can't prove that it's wrong, and then the response is people will just say, "All I'm saying is look into it. That's all I'm saying is just look into it," and they just the whole idea being just go deeper down this rabbit hole.
In a free country, that's going to be a permanent feature of the culture. There are going to be people that disagree about things that you're going to regard as absurd, and that maybe you ought to regard as absurd. But the reason that you've got to let them have their piece is exactly what I was just saying. This is what gives you confidence in your own views, is that you've met the other side. This is John Stuart Mill's, just channeling John Stuart Mill's famous defense of free speech, right? Truth is discovered in its collision with error. You can't just sit and know the truth. And you can't prove that the truth is what it is. The best you can do is consider all the available hypotheses and reject all of the ones that are dubious, and then you're left with the other one. So these people are actually serving
So you don't agree that we should like deplatform Nazis or whatever?
Absolutely not. I think that's that's the path that's going to lead us. That's why I'm scared now. That's the path that's.
You think that's worse?
Horrific dystopia, and that's why. Brave New World and 1984 and these other dystopias are flying off the shelves. After the deplatforming of Parler, 1984 shot to the top of the Amazon best-selling list. People are scared to death of this because this is the path to a really dystopian future.
Although free speech has technically never covered like incitement of violence or anything, like it's always been excluded from the greater, Like, we always said, like, you couldn't shout fire in a movie theater, right? That was the famous example. Like, it wasn't allowed.
Do you know where that expression comes from?
What?
That's a reference to a legal opinion by Oliver Wendell Holmes way back in at the time of World War I. Mm-hmm. The person whose speech they were suppressing was not shouting fire in a crowded theater. The person whose speech they were suppressing was a person handing out anti-war pamphlets. If you start suppressing speech, that's where that goes. each and every time.
He was saying it in a burning movie theater. That's how it all ties together.
He's trying to hand out anti-war pamphlets. It is interesting to me because there's always, like, I don't know, like, for instance, in Europe, it's illegal to deny the Holocaust. You know what I mean? Like, it's not.
It is. It has been abused to suppress dissidents of all kinds. And I would not favor that even there.
Yeah.
Do you think, I think the...
because we can bring it back to first principles, right? If we're all occupying these particular perspectives so that we cannot see things the way other people see them, except by engaging in a conversation with them, then if you empower some of those people to tell other people what they're allowed to say, you are impoverishing our whole cultural environment, no matter how bad what they say is.
But sometimes the truth, like,
it's easy to show that it's wrong. So to go back to your original point, right? You described the circumstance, and one of the key steps in your description was, some people out there can't do the critical thinking that's necessary to sort through for themselves what's true and false. That's the part of the equation that we need to fix.
Right.
We need to make it the case that people are more media savvy, that everybody is better at this. And then this will go up. What's preventing that right now is the tribalism, which is allowing people to engage in really bad arguments when they encounter views they disagree with, because they just associate any view with the tribe that is the out group, and then they show their loyalty to the in group by bashing the out group. That's what's going on social media, and it's a really bad place to be culturally, and it could lead to really terrible things.
Do you think that a certain number of people in society just don't possess the critical thinking skills that are, that would equip them to survive on the internet where things can look very real, everything can look real, and enough other people are saying it? Do you think, that's kind of what makes the whole thing dangerous?
It's certainly true at the margin that there are people who are not competent to be full citizens. I mean, that's what you're saying, right? And that's certainly true. There are people that we would think are not competent to exercise the full rights of citizenship. We believe that of everybody who's below a certain age. And that's an arbitrary line, right? There's plenty of high school kids who are perfectly capable of this, but plenty who aren't. And so we don't let them vote. We don't let them say whatever the hell they want. That seems perfectly reasonable to me, because the whole thing is premised on the idea that we need people who are critical thinkers, active and thoughtful people. And it's an empirical fact that some people are incompetent, but you should be very careful throwing that around. Right?
Well, I think I was saying more the opposite. It's not taking the individuals away from the situation or taking away their rights. It's more the acknowledgement that certain, presenting certain things, through a Twitter account or something is going to, potentially infect so many people that we may want to limit that, and I know it goes to the thing of, should we deplatform people? Should we control this? But if we can identify something that's happening, a movement saying that vaccines are unsafe, or, something like that, that's dangerous for society at large, is it a, the imperative of society to stamp out those things?
That depends on what you mean. I mean, who's doing the stamping, right? Are you empowering the state to exclude perspectives? Are you empowering some narrow set of tech oligarchs who have their hands on the levers that control the whole discourse to do that, and to therefore be tempted, and they will give in to this temptation to do that in ways that you will not approve of? Or is it more wise to just tolerate those folks and refute them in the marketplace of ideas?
It just seems to me that
as a culture overall, I mean, it seems to me the latter is the only course that doesn't lead to a really ugly place.
I think there's one group interacting in the marketplace of ideas, and then there's another group that's on Parler, and it's just like, it's hard to bring those two together.
I think you're wrong, and I think you're not just wrong about the facts there, but you're committing a moral wrong here.
Whoa!
Not acknowledging.
Good thing there's no hell, Colin, because you'd be in trouble.
You're not acknowledging that there are these different perspectives, that people legitimately see things very differently in a deep and visceral way because of their very constitution. This is the kind of stuff that gets that's documented. For example, I mentioned Jonathan Haidt before. We can measure the moral responses to different stimuli And then we can do a factor analysis to find out how many dimensions there are. And this is what Haidt does. And he finds ultimately 6 dimensions to moral response. And very consistently, the different political ideological commitments that people have map onto clusters of different traits in these basic psychological features. And so the folks on the so-called left, the so-called liberals, although many of them are no longer liberals or progressives of some kind, and that's a whole other discussion. But the folks on the so-called left are much more attracted to what are called the harm oppression dimension and the care harm dimensions, whereas conservatives have a balance of all 6 of these dimensions, and those include things like respect for authority and purity and loyalty and liberty. And libertarians have yet again a third way. They score very low on all of those, or very high on the liberty oppression dimension, and very low on all the others, especially the purity dimension, right? And what we have are, and this is an illustration, if you will, of ethical individualism. What we have are human beings that are biologically built for very different responses to the same stimuli. And that all percolates up, and that results in them seeing the world very differently. And the most important thing we need to do if we want to actually learn how things are is we need to use as many eyeballs as we can get access to in order to find out how things really are. And I mean, you're pointing out, Colin, absolutely correctly, right? That all those people over on Parler, they've got distorted views of the world. But this is the part you're not understanding. You have a distorted view of the world. I have a distorted view of the world. Mm-hmm. All have a narrow, distorted.
Not me. I actually know the truth, but go on.
I will concede that that's just barely possible, but I can't.
Ought not.
Logical impossibility in that, although I frankly doubt it.
I guess what worries me though is this idea that like the marketplace of ideas will always produce more moral results, when in fact we've seen in history that like some ideas fundamentally do become dangerous, and in the mass extinction of human life, like Germany convinced a lot of people that Jews were subhuman. In America, we a lot of the justification for slavery was done on this idea that like black people were not as worthy of this idea. And
notice what those totalitarian regimes have to do. The first thing they have to do in every instance to sustain that big lie, they have to suppress the speech of the alternative.
Yeah, but America wasn't a totalitarian country. Only for Black America. Other white people could still.
If you mean during slavery, I think I don't know if I want to get much into the because there's a huge issue about how to narrativize that history, and there's a lot of nuance and a lot of difficulty in it. But roughly speaking, we should not lose track of the fact that slavery was not sort of invented whole cloth in the Americas.
Yeah.
That seemed like the norm. That was the inherited set of institutions that went back as far as anybody could look. And it had its own special and dubious and awful, features in the so-called New World. But ultimately, if you ask me, the narrative that we should understand is, the marketplace of ideas works. If you want to appeal to slavery as proof that the marketplace of ideas doesn't work, that seems really weird to me. Because how did it happen that everybody believed that slavery was wrong? Everybody, damn near, going back as far in history as you want to look, was like, believed that slavery was right. And then all of a sudden, we had the introduction of these liberal societies in Europe in particular, especially in Britain, where it was believed, we should let people say what they want. We should let people have the liberty of speech. And within a few generations, slavery had become problematized. Within a few generations, it was being abolished, especially starting again in Britain. And it took, as folks imagined, a civil war in the United States, because there were people with vested interests who were not listening to the arguments, but had,
financial interests at heart.
Interests, right? If you had implemented a system of suppressing speech during a slave regime, you would still have slavery, right? Because the people in power would be able to suppress those dissidents. And so, yeah, I'm not convinced that that's a good example at all. Now, what you're pointing to, there's a fact of what you're pointing to that is absolutely correct, which is that people can be terribly gullible, right? And they get motivated.
The truth doesn't always win in my,
We are,
I think.
we are very, very flawed thinkers. And this goes back to the original thing we were talking about. The thing to fix is, the fact that people are not such good thinkers. But that is very difficult, and at the end of the day, in the ultimate sense, I suppose probably even impossible, because it's part of our, again, biological inheritance that we wind up having all sorts of shortcuts in our thinking, all sorts of biases that we're typically not aware of. And one of those is to engage in this kind of motivated reasoning that we were just talking about, that the slaveholders would have been incentivized to engage in. The only way to get outside of that I can see, since none of us really does occupy that position where we're beyond the limits and I keep doing this like a horse with blinders on, right? That narrows the perspective. The reason that, the only way that I know of that we can get beyond that is, again, this conversation, this sharing of how it looks from each of our perspectives. And the people that you don't agree with are going to look like lunatics. And what you have to appreciate is, to them, you look like a lunatic. And it's
I am a lunatic. They're right.
They should be, but to them, and to everybody, right? Everybody else is just barking mad, right?
Do you think the calculation changes when it's accompanied by violence, and
Yes.
what level of violence is acceptable to maintain, to say no, that's okay as well, because we still have to maintain the free flow of ideas.
The margins, right, of all of this, it seems to me, is when somebody is actually engaged in violence or is advocating violence, it's inciting, I think you said before, in violence, because that's a different thing, right? I mean, we can draw a pretty sharp line between actually inflicting physical harm on someone and even the worst kinds of speech. So, and that's what rights are all about, is about setting up those boundaries. And these are going to be contested, I think, probably permanently contested across different perspectives, the exact boundaries. But the rough boundaries are pretty clear, right? Bodily integrity and stuff like that. And that means that we can draw up laws right there, which are less susceptible to abuse than laws about the content of speech. Laws about trying to suppress speech that you think is false or something like that, that's going to slip the leash, I think. I think it's much too dangerous to even contemplate. Unless you think you know everything right now, you should not want to go down that path. But saying, look, you can say whatever the hell you want, but your right to say whatever you want ends at, my body.
Well, let's say as a thought experiment, there's a place where people gather and they discuss how they hate another group, and they say, we're going to attack that group. We're going to go injure them and kill them. And then once a month, someone from that place goes out and they kill a few people. Mm-hmm. And obviously, we would all agree that we should lock up that person that went out and killed the people. At what point, after how many months, do we decide we really need to get a handle on this place? Or do you think no, because at that place, they're only talking?
So it's going to depend on what's going on there with some precision. But what you just described sounded to me like a conspiracy to commit murder, and that's itself a crime and should be.
Well,
right?
but then you're just talking about a law. Do you think?
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, you could argue that a lot of these Facebook groups are conspiracies to commit crimes, whether or not a crime happens or not.
If they are in fact planning to commit crimes, yes, and they absolutely are that. And having them on Facebook is still a good thing, because now we've got the paper trail to prove it in court.
It is true. A lot of people did get themselves thrown in prison because they posted on Facebook.
Yes. Yeah. And
hilarious.
And it's important that we're talking here about Facebook, because it was Parler that got deplatformed.
Yeah.
Stuff wasn't done on Parler. This stuff was done on Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah.
And who did the blackballing and the blacklisting and the suppression of Parler? It was people beholden to Twitter and Amazon. Amazon was the one that really kind of...
Yeah, Amazon was like, all right, enough is enough. There was a riot, so they were like, maybe we shouldn't get involved in this.
Yeah, and these are the thorny issues that we have to wrestle with right now, because I don't want to come across sounding like some Pollyanna-ish, it'll all be wonderful.
No. I think they're complex philosophical problems. I don't think anybody's right or wrong. I think it's just it's hard to know, and we live in a strange world where truth and reality are hard to discern. I don't think it's it's complicated.
My favorite thing related to Amazon deplatforming Parler is that the head of the pirate party in Sweden is like, or not the head of the pirate party, the head of the Pirate Bay is like, that's it? You're just giving up? Come on, we switch servers every month. Come on, choose somewhere else.
Well, and that's what's going to happen. I mean, Parler is up now. They got their website up. They don't have the full mechanism, so they're not actually a social media site right now, but they've got a website anyway up, and they're working on the back end now. So they will come back, and I'm not sure that this is going to be a good development, because what it means is that we're seeing the splintering even more. Look, instead of banning free speech, how about we ban all social media? No, I don't really mean that.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems like a philosophical problem.
So I wouldn't actually want to do that, but let me explain why that would be a better solution, and it would be content neutral then. So we wouldn't be empowering the state or anybody to be suppressing anybody's ideas. Here's what social media does, I think. It creates conditions of the worst kind of conformity, the opposite of the heroic individualism I was talking about before. It creates incentives for people to demonstrate their loyalty to the in-group by bashing the out-group, and that's what the out-group exists for. That is the root of so much of what has been wicked and wrong and bad in the history of human culture, that if we could figure out a way to manage that, that would be, in my view, the key. But social media doesn't manage it. It makes it worse. It makes those incentives stronger. It incentivizes you to do this in a purely performative way with people you've never met or had a real conversation with, based on a snippet of their text and responding to them with a little tiny snippet of snark yourself. It does not.
Oh, no, I write whole paragraphs of snark. Don't worry.
Well, satire is good, right? And it's a wonderful way to unfold, unpack, and skewer, what's wrong-headed about what's going on or what
if I have a friend and they're just super anti-vax, and I've tried to reason with them dozens of times and they just won't listen to me?
Should you kill them? Is that moral?
Yeah. There's a limit to what you could do. I would advise against killing them. I don't know about morality, but it would.
Can I vaccinate them while they sleep?
It certainly isn't going to be conducive to the good life to be a murderer, even of anti-vaxxers, as much as that.
Yeah, no, I'm not.
But
anybody.
There's a limit to what you can do, and at some point you just have to say, look, it's your life, and you're incredibly wrong, and this will be borne out. It's already been borne out in the evidence we have so far, and I'm fully confident it will be borne out going forward. And that's all you can do in a free society.
Okay, we got to play some games. We're getting on in the time, so
let's play some games.
This guy's got kids. I think a kid. I don't know. I got to go play World of Warcraft later. We all have busy lives. I assume you're doing something with your life.
I hope so. I'm not sure, but okay.
You have guitars and stuff.
Playing a guitar and riding a motorcycle, I assume.
Same time, I would assume.
We're for motorcycling right now, but
it's quite cold. All right, so the first game we're going to play is Fuck, Marry, Kill, but we don't do it with people. We do it with ideas, and I think the fun. Would you rather do philosophers or actual schools of philosophy?
I think either works for me.
Either works. Colin, do you have a preference?
I'm not going to know enough about either, so I'll just choose whichever. I think schools would be
easier.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll do schools of philosophy. Yeah. So fuck, marry, kill, schools of philosophy. I'm going to type in schools of philosophy so that we have a few list of schools of philosophy from our good friends over at Wikipedia.
Here we go.
Oh, it's alphabetical order. So many.
Yep.
Okay. Do you want to start, Richard? Fuck, marry, kill. Any of them. We usually start with fuck.
Okay.
So that would in this case would be something you like. Maybe not like your marriage material philosophy, but something you get into.
Well, there's a lot.
This is quite a comical idea we've stumbled on.
How do you feel about absurdism? That's first on the list.
Oh, there we go. Monty Python. I'm a huge fan of Monty Python precisely because they give expression to the absurd. And so, existentialism and I don't know. There's too many to list. I'm more into philosophies than I don't think there's any I would want to kill.
Yeah.
Well, there are some that I think are although there are some that I think that are really dangerous. And
I would fuck nihilism, because even though I don't personally really believe in anything, I think just total nihilism is tough, because it's sort of like it's hard to find morality after that. Like, if nothing really matters, then like, how do you be good? And I do think you should probably be good. So
Yes.
like, insofar as I think on a cosmic scale, nothing actually matters. Like, the planets don't give a shit whether we live or die or commit terrible atrocities. Like, it doesn't actually like matter on a universal level. It matters to me, but like, yeah.
This is exactly what led to the existential crisis I was talking about, that is forcing me to reconsider, because I think, and it's what Nietzsche understood by the death of God. It was this emergence of nihilism. And I agree with you 100% that nihilism should be understood not as a philosophy so much as a problem that needs to be overcome.
And I would fuck hedonism. It's the only correct answer.
That is kind of the, technically the correct answer. Yeah. If you're going to put your dick into one of these schools of thought, I would marry existentialism, because it's my own, I do agree. The way I'd understood it when I looked into it in college, which admittedly is a very bare bones, stripped down idea, was basically like, the fact that we even exist at all is totally absurd. Like, it's so ridiculous. And to even try to understand it is almost beyond the capability of human thought. But that, just because it doesn't make sense doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to take, the most out of it and appreciate the gift of being alive, and still try to be a good person and enjoy yourself. And, just because it doesn't make any sense doesn't mean you can't, like, I'll try to be good anyway. So I like that. I think that's cool,
Yeah. I'm done with that. Pretty much the whole deal there. And there's in the history of philosophy, right? Existentialism is often contrasted with Platonism. The problem with existentialism is it might lead to that nihilism that we were talking about before.
Yeah, no, it's a slippery slope, as they say.
Yeah. And the solution to that might be this Platonism. So in my head, I have this war going on between Nietzsche, who's an existentialist, or at least has those tendencies, and Emerson, who is a kind of Platonist, which is the very opposite.
What is Platonism?
This comes out of Plato, right? So this is the idea that there is an ultimate nature of reality, which is true, the beautiful, and the good need to be understood in this perfect abstraction that you can encounter in a pure intuition in your mind. And this has profound religious overtones. At the end of the day, it winds up being almost a mystical thing. And I came into this as pretty much a committed Nietzschean, or really, since I'm trained as an analytic philosopher rather than a continental philosopher, with tendencies that worked in that direction, and as a kind of new atheist type, like Richard Dawkins. Mm-hmm. And I was firmly committed to that till about 5 or 6 years ago. And then, to my own amazement, Emerson started in this battle, right? I paced back and forth, and they're arguing, right? And eventually, Emerson started getting the better of the argument. And it's precisely because of this problem of nihilism. So that's a whole nother long story. But the point was, I agree with you.
Okay, nice, great.
I think you meant fuck in another sense, right? So this is the problem with the word fuck, right? It can mean anything. It can be an adverb.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Verb, right? But yeah, in the sense of boo, right? Fuck nihilism. But in the sense of, yeah, I'd get down with that. Then
yeah, no, it's more like
existentialism, right?
It's more like sexy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like fuck, marry, kill, like the game. You're not like, kill is bad. Fuck is like,
Kill you want nothing to do with. Fuck, you'll mess around with it.
So I would say I would kill libertarianism. I find the whole concept rather silly.
You mean metaphysical libertarianism, or do you mean political libertarianism?
I don't know. Maybe objectivism then, like if we're going to go like pure philosophical, just like this whole idea that like we all can make our own truth and you can just kind of do whatever you want. It's because like I'm just like no, man, you got to consider the fact that other people exist and like you can't just take what you want. Like the world is complex.
Political libertarianism says,
I mean, it's basically like people should be left alone and the state should
that doesn't sound like not understanding that other people exist.
Yeah, no, from a political perspective, yeah, I mean, in theory, sure, we should all like, I don't know, because like, yeah, the state should leave people alone, but like also people need help and we need roads. So like we do actually need like a political apparatus, like not everything can be done through private corporations. So
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's true. I think that's an empirical question. We can't decide by thinking carefully about it.
Yeah. No, there was a pretty.
All I'm saying is ask more questions. Just ask more.
There was like this whole thing, like there were like these folks tried to start like a libertarian like society up in like New Hampshire or something like that. Like they were all gonna like move there and like, what's up?
It's called the Free State Project.
Free State Project, right? And the whole thing ended up turning into kind of a nightmare because like one lady was like feeding the bears because like she just wanted to, and like other people were like, "Well, these bears are becoming kind of a problem." Like,
so I'm a sort of half-hearted participant in the Free State Project. And
are you? Oh boy, dude, I feel silly now.
I got to tell you, that's the what you're describing. It was a disaster. That's not the experience of the people that I've ever heard from.
Really? Yeah.
I'm only a half-hearted participant because I couldn't commit to actually making the move. But yeah, there's lunatics. I mean,
yeah.
But lunatics.
Because some of the people are like, I don't think there should be age of consent, and it's like, all right, well,
There's people at the fringe, and we're already talking about outside the mainstream movement. So there's
sure, yeah, I'm not saying that's representative.
And it's also the Free State Project in particular is, as they like to say, it's the bus, it's not the ideology, right? So it's a coalition of people. So there are voluntarists. That's the kind of it's a style of anarchism. But not everybody who's a libertarian is an anarchist by any stretch. I'm certainly not. And there are folks who are what are called minarchists, who believe in minimal government. I'm not even really that. I'm actually a classical liberal. But I think if there's these empirical questions, so for example, you mentioned provision for the needy. It seems to me to be an empirical question whether or not state provision is going to actually succeed better than private charity or other kinds of private provision, or whether it's going to lead to corruption, and when, under what circumstances it might lead to various kinds of corruption or various kinds of information distortions. That's the kind of thing that Hayek would talk about. In the actual information processing systems that we use to manage distribution and production of resources. So, so yeah, I think it's a lot more nuanced than you're going to get probably on Twitter. I think that's why you had what I would call.
You think because I like to? No, I read a story in the Atlantic. Are you kidding me? You couldn't learn about this on Twitter. I follow comics and sports on Twitter, and it's awesome for that.
Yeah, there are a ticker of scores, right? Twitter can manage that, I suppose.
No, I mean, it's just like there's like sports writers. One thing I like about Twitter is you can interact with people who you would otherwise never. Like I tweeted this joke at one of the guys in Broken Lizard, which is like the people who made Super Troopers. And the guy like wrote back and like riffed on my joke. And like I would never get to riff with the Super Troopers guys without Twitter. Like, come on.
Yeah, and I think you're right that's one of the advantages of these internet
interaction.
We were asking this thing before about whether the internet is a net bad or a net good. I think it's definitely a net good so far, as long as we can avoid collapsing over into some kind of dystopian future that I'm sure none of us want.
So you don't want to kill any philosophies, is what I'm hearing.
I really am not keen on killing anything. I actually am a pacifist, right? Or I was.
Me too.
Exactly a pacifist.
Or as I like to call myself, a coward.
Yeah. Opposed to wars that are popular, right? Because I actually marched.
I don't think there's been a necessary war in a very long time.
Well, that's the thing. I think initiating the use of violence, the anarchists we were just talking about will use that as a principle. It's always wrong to initiate violence. I'm not comfortable with those kinds of strong principles.
Yeah, almost. I mean, if you were, say, freeing the folks of North Korea, well, I could, there's a interesting.
There's almost always these exceptions to the rule, and state allowed for an exception to that, right?
Yeah.
So I don't believe in that kind of dogmatic absolutism. But in general, I think, every philosophy should be heard, and then it can stand or fall on its merits. And we have not just an opportunity, but I think really an obligation to try to engage that, to actually try to make.
When we say fuck, marry, kill, we're not saying destroy it off the face of the earth. We're saying that you don't like it. It's not for you. Yeah, it's not.
It's about the impulse, right? All right, so we can say it's about what is your first instinct, right? Which might be to do one of those three things.
Well, no, it's more like, like we do it for pizza a lot. So when I say I want to kill like Pepe's or whatever, I'm not saying no one should enjoy Pepe's. I'm just saying it's not on my list of pizzas that I want to eat immediately.
Yep.
We didn't explain enough nuance. All right, let's move on to the next game. We're about out of time. So this game is called Mayor for a Day, and basically what it means is we basically give you $1 million to do anything you want in the greater New Haven area, however you think it would best benefit the community or whatever your personal interests are. So do you have any ideas?
I think if there's one thing that we could do in this neck of the woods that would...
Is it create better QAnon videos?
Provocative, and it's going to fit all the stuff I've said so far. I think the schools need to be incredibly reconsidered and rethought from the ground up. And I would like to see basically these giant institutional prisons destroyed brick by brick.
Which schools? The colleges or the elementary schools? All the schools?
Well, the university system has got its own problems now, but I'm talking about the schools, the public schools for K through 12, and I think these institutions are built in a way that is designed for an industrial society that we don't live in anymore, and they are incredibly distorting. They're all about learning not how to think, the things that we've been talking about here, but rather how to sit down and shut up. And I think that's a really, really bad thing. And so if I had $1 million, I don't know if that would be enough. I would have to look and see.
No, that would not even be close.
We normally don't allow education as an answer, but we'll if you want to destroy the schools completely, we'll take it. Yeah,
I could tear them down with $1 million.
You could build a bomb with $1 million.
The alternative, but the alternative that I would want to, so maybe I would take the $1 million to try to lobby someone to provide the rest of the money, would be to actually provide something close to a really robust school choice system that made it really easy to start your own school, so that we would have, the whole city would be peppered with basically neighborhood schools that would have to make, or that could be, this would still be publicly funded, but you would get all these different perspectives in a way that would be much more convenient and effective for parents, and a lot less inclined to just teach school, which is, I think, what the schools mostly teach. They don't teach children, they teach school. And teaching school means sit down and shut up until the bell rings.
My friends were in a punk band, and one of the lyrics I always loved was, "School is garage for children."
Yes, indeed. Yes.
And it still sticks with me. It's like, I don't know if it's 100% true. I definitely had teachers in school who taught me interesting shit, but yeah.
It's not the teachers, right? I mean, that's the other side of this. This would empower those teachers, right? Because I imagine teachers would be the ones starting these neighborhood schools.
Yeah. Conversely, 25 kids just talking all at the same time is kind of a nightmare in its own hell.
What you need to do is you need to find a way to actually make that conversation work, even though you're going to have all of these different voices. And that's not impossible if you got, say, 25. It gets really unmanaged, because that's what I do in a classroom, right? But it gets really unmanaged.
Well, yeah, but you teach adults, not fucking third
who've
graders.
chosen to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also true.
that it's not compulsory that they have to be there, and in fact in my classes it's not compulsory at all, because I don't do the, I'm not going to mark you down for failing to show up or whatever.
I think also people who go to your school probably are the age where they can show decorum and not just shout over.
Yeah, kids are unsocialized little monsters, right? They really are.
Yeah, they have to be stopped.
I got talked in over the course of this pandemic to getting a new puppy, which at first I would resist. I'm like, you don't want to get a puppy at the time of the pandemic when everybody's crazy and busy as it is. But then they said, no, this is the perfect time to get a puppy because everybody will be around, and they're right. But having a puppy around is like having an unsocialized toddler around who never grows beyond being an unsocialized toddler. And so, it's really been brought home to me just how difficult it is dealing with people who are not fully cooked yet, not fully baked as the critical thinkers, the individuals, right, that we aspire to create.
I mean, I know a few people, Colin knows them too, who are perfectly of age who are not fully baked yet.
I never will be.
No, it's not going to happen. Okay, well, that's about as much time as we have. I had other questions, but we just were not able to get to it because you share a lot of philosophical thoughts. So
I'm full of them.
That's okay. That's your job. It's all right.
Comfortable with being that person. So.
You could not be anything but a philosophy professor.
It is in my bones.
You were fated for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like I'm fated to be a small town podcast host.
Exactly.
Richard, do you have anything you want to plug before we go, like a website or?
Well, yeah. The most important thing right now is just the the philosophy department. If you enjoyed any of this, if it was provocative, if it made you angry because you want to respond, right? By all
Don't
means,
email me. Go to Southern.
Josh or Colin, right? Those guys are fully innocent. I bear the full responsibility for what I've said here, and don't blame the rest of my department for it either, because I speak for myself right now. But now I'm going to speak as chair on behalf of the program. We got something for everybody. Whatever it is that you are into, whatever you think is right, we make an effort to try to make sure that all of those different perspectives are represented, and we would love to have you. And you don't have to, necessarily be a student. Come join our philosophy club or whatever. I don't have a website for that just yet. We're in the process of putting one together. We had a Facebook group, but folks are welcome to email me if they want to say join the conversation. I can include them. Right now, the philosophy club meetings are happening every week starting next week via online remote meetings. So it's easy for anybody who just wants to drop in and join the conversation to do so. You don't have to be a student. You don't have to be anything in particular. You don't have to know a bunch of philosophy. Conversation is very freewheeling, much like this conversation we had here. And I just lay it all out just like I've done here. And I expect everybody else to do the same, and we have a good time.
Cool. All right. So yeah, if you just Google him, Richard Volkman, Volkman, I assume if you go to scsu.edu, you could track down the philosophy department that way. So yeah, go check it out. Take a philosophy class. You're going to learn a lot, Yeah,
they're very fun. I will say the couple of philosophy classes I took were some of the best classes I took, just because they're very, very interesting. Yeah. When you think about a college experience, that's the kind of thing that you picture, people sitting around just talking with each other. So
yeah, they made us take philosophy and ethics in engineering school because they're basically like, all right, otherwise you'll all become mad scientists. We know we have to teach you some base ethics.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, computer science is all ethics and logic philosophy classes, yeah.
Like, you better learn about Plato before we teach you how to build this universe.
Yeah.
So, cool. Yeah, go to betweentworocks.com. I think I've set this up on youtube.com/betweentworocks, which presumably if you're this far to the podcast, you already found. I don't know. I can't tell you. So, Colin, you have your apartments for rent, so just check Craigslist.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Nothing on there right now.
Nothing on there. No inventory. So
no inventory.
Don't rent anything from anyone else.
That's right. Just hold steady. There'll be something else soon.
Richard, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you had a good time.
I did indeed. I hope you all had a good time too.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, this will be on YouTube and Spotify and all those jazz. So again, if you're listening to this, you already have gotten through the whole thing. So I don't know why I'm telling you, but here we are. Thank you guys so much, and have a great night.